The truth about UFOs remains shrouded in mystery. One high-ranking military official expressed his bewilderment. If the United States Air Force has discovered alien bodies, I have not been informed about it, but I would like to know. This question raises an important topic. Is it possible that the military has hidden the truth about UFOs from the president? Such things happen all the time, and it raises numerous questions. What does the commander-in-chief actually know about aliens? In the face of a growing threat emanating from space, the United States has faced the necessity of defending itself against UFOs. After World War II, every leader of the country dealt with issues related to the national security threat posed by extraterrestrial intelligence. In search of facts that could lift the veil of mystery, researchers turned to a dossier titled UFOs and the White House. In the early morning of the 25th of February 1942, just 2 months after the attack on Pearl Harbor, there was tranquility in the White House. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt was asleep, but 3,000 miles away from him on the West Coast, the enemy in the form of an unidentified flying object was already threatening the nation's security. A blip on the radar screen caused real chaos. The events of that day began with a radio message when the operator contacted the duty sergeant. "Attention! This is not a drill." The duty sergeant activated the alarm and pandemonium ensued. In the first minutes, people were in genuine shock, but soon professionals began to carry out their duties. Those responsible for the searchlights turned them on, and those in charge of the weapons prepared them for combat. Within a few minutes, the night sky over the Southern California coast was illuminated by flashes of light and beams from anti-aircraft searchlights. However, as the troops began to act, confusion arose, as no one knew exactly where the enemy was. This mystery remains unsolved to this day. Many veterans swear they saw an aircraft that night, but officers claim there was nothing in the sky. Even ordinary people without military experience confirm that they saw an aircraft. It is indeed something very mysterious. The military concluded that perhaps some airplanes had been detected, but no information emerged about whose they were, American, Japanese, or someone else's. One witness expressed his viewpoint. "I think it was a UFO." He added that he does not intend to talk about little green men, but his conviction that it was a UFO remains strong. For about an hour, the salvos of defensive fire rumbled, but when dawn broke, it became clear that the only thing the soldiers had damaged was the city of Los Angeles. The shells fired into the sky fell to the ground and exploded, leaving destruction in their wake. The media reacted, as is often the case in such situations, possibly exaggerating the events to attract the attention of readers. Among the many stories related to the incident in Los Angeles, one concerned Japanese submarines, from which, it was rumored, unidentified devices were launched. Eyewitnesses claimed that these devices hovered in the air, not following a typical trajectory. There was even one photograph of such an object, which was well lit and did not resemble any of the known aircraft at that time. Reports of the damage inflicted on the city were sent to President Franklin Delano Roosevelt in Washington. The investigation was entrusted to General George Marshall, the Chief of Staff of the Department of Defense. Marshall's report became one of the most curious documents in this story. It stated that in the sky that night, there were no fewer than 15 aircraft, with speeds ranging from very slow to an instantaneous increase to 330 kilometers per hour, and altitudes from 3,000 to 6,000 meters. At the same time, there was no aggression. No bombs fell, and no one was injured. That night, there were neither Allied nor American planes in the sky, which caused confusion. It made no sense for the Japanese to behave in such a manner. If even one plane had been in the sky, there would have been no way to avoid bombs. The exact reaction of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt to the information about the unidentified flying object remains unknown. It is only known that he sent a sharp letter to the Secretary of War, Harry Stimson, demanding to find out who was responsible for the air raid warning system in the United States. He also wondered whether someone without official access could have activated this system. Stimson's response to the president and the explanation for the appearance of the unknown enemy remain a mystery. No records on this matter have been found in the National Archives of the Roosevelt Presidential Library. One expert notes that at the time, the events were likely not perceived as an extraterrestrial phenomenon, although in 1942 these facts aroused extraordinary curiosity. The Axis powers controlled the entire continent and, according to the expert, Roosevelt was so preoccupied with military affairs and his poor health that UFOs did not occupy much of his attention. In July 1947, new threats of war and a new enemy, the Soviet Union, compelled Americans to look to the skies. Some saw UFOs there. President Harry Truman was informed of an incredible incident in New Mexico which soon became known to journalists and stirred the entire country. For the first time, the president had to confront the issue of UFOs directly. Truman found himself in the right place at the right time and became a key figure in addressing the UFO problem of those years. It is known that presidents were either informed about flying saucers or not informed at all. In Truman's memoirs and in the documents of his administration, there are no mentions of this. However, we know that this occurred thanks to General Robert Lender, who at that time was a colonel in the Air Force. For exemplary service, Truman appointed Lender as his personal pilot and representative of the Air Force on UFO matters. The Central Intelligence Agency actively collaborated with Lender. According to him, every 3 months he personally reported to the president about unidentified objects, and this continued for as long as Truman held his office. According to an expert's estimates, there were no fewer than 18 such reports. He adds that many would likely have wanted to be a fly on the wall during these meetings, as all reports were verbal and no records were kept. If they did not want it to appear on the front page of the New York Times, nothing was recorded. However, the incident that occurred in the sky over the Capitol could not be ignored. 1952 became one of the most significant years in the history of UFOs. A whole wave of vivid events, both military and civilian in significance, swept across the United States. One weekend in July 1952, a UFO appeared in the sky over the Capitol, resembling an invasion. Then the objects disappeared, and military planes returned, but they reappeared again. This made people realize that the government was controlling nothing, absolutely nothing. The news about UFOs became a real sensation and made the front pages of many publications. Truman took this seriously, and more public figures began to speak openly about flying saucers. At one of the press conferences in 1950, Truman also mentioned this: "Yes, we discuss it at every meeting with the military, but they never provide me with specific data about what they have seen." When asked if he could add anything, he replied, "No, I cannot. I have nothing more to say about this." In this context, it is important to note that such events occur regularly. Flying saucers and other unidentified objects have become part of discussions. But many high-ranking officials, such as President Truman, never shared their personal experiences in this area. However, as ufologists claim, Dwight Eisenhower indeed had such an experience in the early 1950s. In 1952, near the coast of Great Britain, a bluish object was spotted from one of the military ships, which was observed for about 10 minutes. During this time, Eisenhower, accompanied by an admiral, went out on deck and also witnessed this phenomenon. They stood and watched, and Eisenhower, in his own words, said, "I better go take a look at it from the inside." The person who later recounted this case had not heard anyone else mention it. Under Eisenhower, UFOs became part of American pop culture thanks to cinema and television. However, there were many materials in the White House beyond movie scripts. During his presidency, secrecy surrounding UFO-related issues became the norm. Under pressure from the Eisenhower administration, even the military lost access to this information, which was happening in America. Sometimes people close to the White House made spontaneous remarks. In May 1954, General Nathan Twining, the Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force, made an unexpected statement, noting that even if UFOs came from Mars and they were sufficiently advanced, he had no reason to be concerned. He added that any other power should know that in this hemisphere they were going to remain the masters. In 1963, President John Kennedy was on a boat near his home in Hyannisport when, according to reports, a silver object appeared about 18 meters away from the boat. It began to descend, and those on the boat were able to see it clearly. Kennedy asked his companions not to tell anyone about what had happened. Although there is no confirmation of this story, it remains in the realm of rumors, where anyone can choose to believe or not believe. It is difficult to say what exactly Kennedy knew about UFOs. After his tragic death, only a few documents related to his name remained in the White House. There are many mysteries associated with Kennedy and UFOs, and there are compelling reasons to believe that he indeed possessed real information about unidentified objects. Kennedy was deeply concerned about how to avoid war, especially in light of the threat posed by nuclear-armed missiles launched from Cuba. He understood that UFOs could provoke the onset of military actions and recognized the necessity of diplomacy regarding matters related to these objects. According to documents, Robert Kennedy, the brother of the President and the Attorney General, personally distributed messages from UFO researchers between Congressman Gerald Ford and representatives of the Air Force. UFOs sparked significant interest in Robert Kennedy, and there are documents detailing meetings with these objects. Written confirmations of how a person in such a high position witnessed such events are rarely encountered. Many UFO researchers believe that differences in political views may affect access to certain information and that some U.S. presidents were not fully informed on this issue. Some researchers believe that John Kennedy was the first who truly knew the truth about UFOs. He sought to outpace the Russians in the race to the moon, but space itself did not interest him. It was more about competition and politics. In contrast to him, Lyndon Johnson showed immense interest in space. When a person confronts such a destructive force, he resembles a candle challenging the sun. Lyndon Baines Johnson first appeared in the White House as the vice president to John Kennedy. In September 1961, he received a letter from a UFO researcher reporting an alien visitation. Johnson responded to the letter, advising the author to contact the executive secretary of NASA instead of directing him to the Air Force. This decision seemed strange, especially considering that the vice president personally replied to a message about a UFO. During Johnson's administration, the military was ordered to investigate a UFO crash near Kecksburg in Pennsylvania. The events that occurred on the 9th of December 1965 became another chapter in the history of UFOs and the White House. A search team worked at the crash site, and NASA identified the object found. The Air Force also sent its representatives. Ultimately, the investigation concluded with the object being taken to a laboratory, where it was labeled a meteorite. Thus, this became the official explanation. In his research of presidential materials, the author always sought the main kernel. He reviewed the archives of the White House to understand who among the participants was at the location where the President and the Secretary of Defense were. At that moment, the President was at his ranch in Austin, Texas. The next morning, all key figures were already at the ranch. Among them was James Webb, the head of NASA, as well as the governor of the state of California and the chiefs of staff. Photographs taken that day at the ranch have been preserved. It was later said that this meeting, which involved all the chiefs of staff, was dedicated to the war in Vietnam. Although this issue was indeed discussed, it was on that day that the president was shown photographs of that very object. There is substantial evidence that this catastrophe was actively discussed within the president's circle. President Richard Milhous Nixon also showed interest in the topic of UFOs. People who communicated with Nixon on this matter claimed that his interest was immense. Rumor has it that he collected a large collection of books about UFOs, which raised questions. Many researchers believe that Nixon received specific information that could be made public. It seems he was planning to share his thoughts on the past, present, and future of UFOs in a book by Robert Emenegger, as well as in a television program dedicated to this topic. Emenegger stated that he was negotiating with Republicans to ensure that only people from the government participated in the show, as the idea was to reveal some secrets. Bob Emenegger, an advertising producer and television producer, became acquainted with an important person, Bob Heldman, with whom he studied at the University of California. It was a true brotherhood. Later, under Nixon, Heldman became the chief of staff. In the mid-70s, Emenegger and his partners were involved in investigative television programs and worked with archives at Norton Air Force Base. Paul Shartle got them involved in this matter, stating that there was a film recording the landing of an extraterrestrial spacecraft at Holloman Air Force Base. This film was allegedly sent to Norton, where other documents are stored. At first, the author thought he was being pranked, but the topic of UFOs was too intriguing. Paul advised him to contact the Pentagon, but to pretend he was looking for something else. Otherwise, he would be quickly turned away if they realized he was interested in UFOs. he recommended acting exactly as he said to uncover the whole truth. George Weinbrenner, who headed the department studying foreign technologies, had a personal bunker at Wright-Patterson. The author descended into a large hall where there were small cameras everywhere. He asked Weinbrenner what he knew about the landing of the alien ship at Holloman Air Force Base. Expecting him to respond that he did not know, he was surprised when Weinbrenner reached out, pulled out some book, and handed it to him. Opening the book, the author discovers that it is addressed to his friend, Colonel George Weinbrenner, from Dr. Allen Hynek. This work is entirely dedicated to unidentified flying objects. At that time, Hynek held the position of scientific advisor to the Air Force. Confused, Emin Egger immediately contacted his friend, Chief of Staff Bob Haldeman, who was at the White House. Egger inquired whether he knew anything about a UFO landing at Holloman Air Force Base. Haldeman replied that he had heard something like that but did not have specific information. Egger asked whether the president was aware but did not receive a clear answer. He pondered what American presidents might actually know about UFOs. One of his friends helped him meet with two former presidents, both of whom claimed to have seen footage of the UFO landing at Holloman Air Force Base. At that time, Gerald Ford, while being a congressman, showed interest in the topic of UFOs, as residents of his district reported sightings in the 60s. Many forget that the primary duty of a congressman is to serve his constituents. Jerry was always willing to listen to people, even off duty. Ford took this on to help those seeking the truth and expressed a desire for Congress to investigate these cases. On the 5th of April, 1966, the Congressional Defense Committee held public hearings on the topic of unidentified flying objects, attended by Secretary of the Air Force Harold Brown. He stated that the investigation would be open and all hearings would be public. It is unknown how Ford's perspective on UFOs changed after these hearings, but many researchers assert that, upon becoming president, he appointed advisors who were aware of the potential threat posed by UFOs. Among his aides were Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, and George Bush Sr., who was then the director of the CIA. Ford needed people he could trust and who trusted him. After leaving the White House, Ford wrote in a letter to a former Air Force intelligence officer who dealt with UFOs that during his time in Congress, as well as in his role as vice president and president, he had repeatedly requested information about UFOs. As a rule, officials did not provide any information. As president, Ford never raised this topic. This could create the impression that he had lost interest in it, but in the author's opinion, he decided that discussing such issues was detrimental to his political career. There are few documents linking UFOs and the White House, and even fewer reports that any of the presidents might have seen them. Only one public acknowledgement belongs to President Jimmy Carter, who became the first commander-in-chief to state that he had seen a UFO. Carter was nicknamed the UFO president because he indeed claimed to have witnessed this phenomenon. An organization studying UFOs wrote him a letter asking him to describe what had happened. Jimmy Carter did just that, and the rest became history. As Carter himself recounted, the incident occurred in October 1969 when he arrived in Leary, Georgia, to speak at a Lions Club. He emotionally shared his impressions, and it made a strong impression on the audience that Carter, then a senator, spoke openly about it. Even after becoming governor and then president, he never recanted his words. He always honestly stated, "Yes, I saw something, and no, I cannot determine what it was." This underscored his sincerity. He did not mock those who claimed to have seen unidentified objects. Carter always said that he could understand people who had experienced similar events and never made fun of them, as he himself had undergone something similar. Carter's account paints a vivid picture of what happened that night. He never tried to determine what he had seen. A bright glow appeared in the sky to the west, which attracted the attention of many. One of the witnesses, Carter, described this object as having clear circular outlines, which seemed to glow from within. It was located about 1 kilometer from the Earth and moved both forward and backward before disappearing. When it comes to UFOs, many people look at you with skepticism, and this can stop witnesses from sharing their observations. Carter, however, never wavered in his description. This indicates that he was one of the most honest people ever encountered. He sought to support UFO researchers, wanting to convey to them that the government knows much more than it lets on. During his campaign, Carter promised that once he entered the White House, he would disclose all available information about UFOs. He indeed took steps to make information about possible UFO sightings accessible to the general public and scientists. How did he manage to keep this promise? As soon as he became president, he received a letter reminding him, "You are now in a position to fulfill what you promised. Then do it." During his presidency, no fewer than 9,000 letters regarding UFOs were received at the White House. Although he did not respond to all these letters, many were curious about how he intended to fulfill his promise made in 1976. Some researchers suspected that there were other reasons why Carter could not keep his promises. The CIA occasionally provided the president with important intelligence information, and one of those who did so was George Bush Sr. When Carter inquired with him about materials related to UFOs, Bush replied, "You do not need to know this. There is a need to know, and there is curiosity." This emphasized that curiosity drove the president, although proving that Bush informed Carter about UFOs was not easy. Nevertheless, during his presidency, Carter made some documents regarding UFOs public. This became a golden time for the UFO community, as thousands of documents became available thanks to the Freedom of Information Act. Approximately half of them had been stored in archives for already 30 or 40 years. Most of these materials were declassified during Carter's 4 years in office and included both eyewitness testimonies and official military reports. Access to these documents gave a serious boost to UFO research. We live today in the name of the future, and this should be clear to everyone. It is time for us to start acting. This is very important, emphasized the researchers. It is known that Ronald Reagan was also a witness to 2 UFO sightings before he became president. One of these incidents was described by actress Lucy Liu in her memoirs. She recalled how Reagan and his wife Nancy were late to a Hollywood party, and upon arriving were very excited, telling everyone about the strange object they had seen in the sky as it descended over the coast. Ronald Reagan showed interest in UFOs, which was also related to his personal experience. He himself had seen something unusual through the window of an airplane when he was the governor of California. This event left a vivid impression on him. Reagan reportedly witnessed a white light that zigzagged next to his plane. He ordered the pilot to follow this object, trusting the experienced pilot who had logged 30,000 hours, an incredible amount for any pilot. Both he and the other crew members saw this mysterious object pursuing it for several minutes before it suddenly vanished from sight. Perhaps it was this event that led Reagan to frequently raise the topics of UFOs and extraterrestrial life during his presidency. In February 1988, while speaking at the annual conference of the Conservative Party, Reagan stated, "Our unwavering, deeply rooted, and all-encompassing skepticism with which we respond to UFOs has been declared the great wisdom of Washington." The preparation of his speeches was a complex process that involved at least 25 agencies of the State Department. Each contributed, and Reagan paid special attention to every word and fact mentioned in his speeches. He asked his speechwriters to prepare a speech about the potential danger of UFOs, believing that in the event of an alien invasion, humanity could unite, and our world would become one. He referred to this as his fantasy. One of the most intense discussions on this topic occurred between Reagan and his speechwriter, Rat Dawson, who attempted to exclude elements of fantasy from the presidential speech. This discussion preceded Reagan's address to the United Nations General Assembly in 1987. In a memo addressed to Reagan, Dawson noted, "Mr. Reagan, here is your speech. Please take a look at it." Reagan reviewed the text and noticed that an important point about aliens had been removed. In his comments, he wrote by hand, "The speech text has too much anti-Soviet sentiment. I want this to be corrected. And, by the way, could you please return to the text, 'My fantasy that humanity could unite in the face of the appearance of beings from other planets.'" Not daring to ignore the president's instructions, Dawson rewrote the speech. In his address to the 42nd United Nations General Assembly on September 21, 1987, Reagan said, "The differences between us could vanish if we were faced with a threat coming from space. And I ask you, are there not aliens among us already? The reason people often see UFOs may be simple. They simply want to." Ufologists argue that George Herbert Bush is the key to modern understanding of UFOs. As president, Bush indeed played an important role in the development of ufology. His significance lay in the fact that many researchers always believed he was aware of what was happening. Serving as the director of the CIA under President Ford and then as vice president under Ronald Reagan, he received a vast number of reports, including information about UFOs. Herbert Walker Bush, being the head of the CIA, was, according to many, directly involved in the study of UFOs. If this is the case, then he is unlikely to ever speak about it. There is an opinion that he indeed knows a lot about UFOs. People often wrote to the CIA about their sightings and sent requests based on the Freedom of Information Act, inquiring about materials related to UFOs. There were numerous such requests, but the CIA claims that it no longer deals with these matters. However, can it be believed that many Americans agree with this? We, as a nation, are known for our curiosity and thirst for knowledge. Nevertheless, there is something that indicates a connection between President Bush and UFOs. When the author wrote to the Bush Library, he was informed that there is only one document in their archive concerning UFOs. Officially, there are no materials linking George Bush to this topic, yet many ufologists are convinced that he possesses significant knowledge about unidentified flying objects. The answer to the question about UFOs may be hidden among the many government documents that have recently been declassified by various military agencies. Researchers believe that George Bush and his administration, including figures like Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld, represented a powerful team that meticulously concealed information about UFOs from the public, keeping it in the hands of the military and intelligence services. Many believe that George Bush was a man who, apparently, understood well what was happening in this, shall we say, secret world. This world extends beyond his presidency and never acts openly. He has resources from oil sales and numerous useful connections, allowing him to be aware of events before others. In 1947, in Roswell, New Mexico, according to some researchers, no alien spacecraft crash occurred. In the presidential archives of William Jefferson Clinton, there is an extensive collection of materials related to UFOs, from Roswell to the present day. Under Clinton, UFOs, open to the world, became more accessible and discussed. The Clintons claimed that their library in Little Rock had many windows, symbolizing the openness of his administration. This became a goldmine for researchers. Compared to other presidents, Clinton did more to make classified materials available to the public while simultaneously seeking to reduce the level of secrecy in the government. He became the second president to raise the topic of UFOs at the state level and was not afraid to speak about it publicly. In one of his speeches, he touched upon the issue of public safety, noting that in the past, people believed they had a better chance of seeing a UFO than addressing safety concerns. This approach allowed him to put his opponents in an awkward position. Many researchers believe that the Clinton administration was inclined towards disclosing classified materials about UFOs. One of the most emotional remarks on this topic was made in President Clinton's speech on the 30th of November 1995. Writing a presidential speech is a complex process that takes months, and every word in the text is carefully scrutinized. Clinton addressed an audience of 80,000 people in Northern Ireland, where he read a letter from a boy named Ryan. He said, "Ryan, even if you are not here today, I will answer your question. If the U.S. Air Force did discover alien bodies, I have not been informed about it, but I would like to know." This statement hinted at the American press, which speaks more than it knows, and also cast a shadow on the military. When researchers looked into the initial reports from the Air Force regarding the incident in Roswell, declassified in 1994, they found no mentions of aliens there. The question of trust in people and the disclosure of information about UFOs remained relevant. Half of those present at the meeting were convinced that UFOs are real and were asking whether the president would reveal what is really happening. Some ufologists believe that George Walker Bush, the 43rd President of the United States, utilized the powerful team of his father to maintain the secrecy of the materials regarding UFOs. These two were significant figures at the time, continuing to influence the situation. In discussions related to UFOs, special attention is given to Dick Cheney and Rumsfeld. These figures have always been regarded as ufologists with extensive connections, people who are almost always in the know about what is happening. However, It remains unclear how much the administration actually informed the president about issues concerning unidentified flying objects. Many believe that it was Vice President Dick Cheney who dealt with this problem. In April of 2001, UFO researcher Grant Cameron had reason to doubt Cheney's willingness to disclose information about UFOs. He was planning to ask him several uncomfortable questions. Have you seen a UFO? Who knows? What do you think about it? And finally, the most important question, have you been informed about UFOs? Perhaps someone once came to your office with papers for you to sign and informed you about what is happening. Or maybe it was not just once. If it could be proven that the president is kept informed about events, it would mean that UFOs not only exist but also deserve serious attention. These questions Grant Cameron intended to ask Dick Cheney during his appearance on a radio talk show in Washington, where he managed to get through to the studio. Cameron recalled George Bush's statement made in July of the previous year, which sparked discussions about the emergence of a UFO program under Cheney's leadership. In response to a question about what he knew as vice president regarding UFOs, Cheney stated, "If I were informed of something like that, it would probably be classified information." This statement shocked Cameron, as it confirmed that information about UFOs could indeed be classified and that Cheney had no intention of discussing it. This meant that the government continued to keep everything secret, and that it had something to hide. The topic of government secrets regarding UFOs and their potential threats to national security sparked heated debates. Every leader of the country either knows or can know what data is held by the government agencies dealing with UFOs. However, the question remains, why does the White House not provide any information about this? Cameron did not have an answer to this question. The declassification of materials about UFOs has become a real nightmare for any president of the United States. It is like being a little pregnant. One cannot be a little open. In such cases, there is always a feeling that there exists some structure where all information is gathered, and it is always interesting to know who is in charge of it all. Such a situation creates an excellent breeding ground for conspiracy theories. Cameron believes that presidents simply have to accept the rules of the game. Their time in the White House is limited, while intelligence agencies exist forever. Maintaining secrecy regarding UFOs is the easiest way to avoid unnecessary troubles. Ordinary people need to understand that the disclosure of materials about UFOs is in their best interest. It is necessary for survival so that the government, which they have trusted since childhood, truly becomes a government for the people. Declassifying the archives is the only way to achieve this, as it is a huge part of history that has been hidden from them for 6 decades. This is unacceptable for Americans, for ordinary people. Cameron wonders what has really changed since the time of President Roosevelt. If we do not consider the progress in the development of technology and security, the White House still views unidentified flying objects as a source of potential threat. In April 2005, a report was received stating that radar had detected an unidentified flying object in the sky above the White House. The alarming report that an unidentified aircraft had breached no-fly zones caused a real uproar in the White House. Special services quickly responded to the situation, taking their positions and evacuating people from the danger zone. At that time, President Bush and Vice President Cheney took shelter in underground bunkers. The chaotic actions of the security service during this incident resembled the confusion that engulfed the troops defending against a similar threat in the distant 1942. What actually happened? According to a report from the Department of Homeland Security, the cause of it all was an accidental flare on the radar screen.